Hello, and welcome to our session on widening access, participation and representation. You're in for a treat with some wonderful speakers today who'll be talking about how they've been working with intent to take meaningful action in equity, diversity and inclusion spaces. We'll be joined by Dr. Sandra Appiah and Dr. Deeba, and also with my colleague Rachel Mill, who's our senior marketing for McGraw International. A little bit of housekeeping first. Please do put your questions in the question tab of the general chat. And for any general comments, we'd love to have activity and conversation in the chat box. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but of course we may run out of time, so we'll get back to you if that is the case. And first, I want to talk to you a little bit about McGraw-Hill's approach to EDI and our considerations. To start with the problem, higher education and education publishing, they often reinforce systemic structural issues that we see. To take leadership as an example, senior leaders in higher education tend to be white and male. When we select our lead authors, we are looking for people with high status and large networks, which inevitably replicates this bias. We've seen that we've seen that women are cited less than their male counterparts, and we know that publications and research impact are big drivers for an academic career. We know that less than 1% of UK professors are Black. If we look to the literature, it overwhelmingly neglects the global south. So there are certainly issues that we need to address. I do see digital publishing as a way to accelerate a change and move towards inclusivity. We know that digital first contributions tend to be fast to the market. They can be varied in format, and that allows for a quicker injection of case studies or other examples of diverse lived experiences. With advances in EdTech and personalized learning, we can support students and meet them where they're at, which should hopefully work to close the attainment gap, which still persists for students from ethnic minority backgrounds. So what has McGraw-Hill been doing in this space? Well, in 2020, we produced inclusive language guidelines for our authors and our copy editors and vendors. And this made sure that we were challenging people to think about their choice of words and make sure that it was as inclusive as possible. We've also built an editorial advisory board with a stream for EDI experts. Dr. Sandra Appiah is one of those people on our advisory board panel, and it's important that we have advisors who are entrenched in higher education learning and can let us know how we can make our solutions as inclusive as possible. We also have been taking a digital first approach to all of our commissioning and product roadmap building. This includes online case studies, chapter content, videos. All of these elements can help diversify the voices that we have contributing. We also have accessibility in mind that we need to consider. There are guidelines coming into place for EU countries in June 2025, which we're working particularly hard to address, but we have always been building our solutions with accessibility in mind. One of the things that we ensured we reviewed was our avatars and the images that we use in our digital solutions and our print solutions to make sure that they represent a diverse population and make sure that not only are pictures of, say, in marketing collateral, students who represent a diverse population, but also figures of authority, the people who are teaching in the classes. And last but not least, we've been partnering with higher education institutions. I'm excited to draw your attention to our work with Middlesex University in just a moment, but we also have a partnership with the RNIB and their Bookshare initiative, which supports learners with visual disabilities. But to look more closely at how we've been co-creating an inclusive curriculum with Middlesex, it started with thought leadership contributing blogs and seminars on some of the current issues. But we quickly moved into a community building space, and Dr. Sandra Appiah set up the Black Chemists Initiative to build a community of diverse voices in STEM. This in turn really helped McGraw Hill expand our network of subject matter experts, not only for commissioning new content, but also for reviewing our existing content and seeing how we can make it more inclusive. We supported a research conference which showcased successes in academia, and this is so important when role modelling is critical to students and staff being able to continue to see an academic career that is supportive of everyone. And with that, we interviewed notable academics from ethnic minority backgrounds, looked at the obstacles that they might have had to face, and the opportunities and successes that they have been able to have. We held a How to Get Published workshop, which did have a particular focus on, unfortunately, the gamification that might still need to exist in some areas of publishing, and how they could overcome some of the challenges that white authors perhaps do not face. I'd love to say that we were in a position where we live in an equal world and no author is disadvantaged because of their background and where they come from. But until that point, it's important that we come together as a community and can recognise some of the barriers that are facing people. Meritocracy only exists where there is opportunity as well. One of the other things that we have done is launch a white paper which looks at what Middlesex has been doing in this space. And with that, I want to introduce Rachel Mill to talk about the work and how they pulled everything together. Thank you.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who's been able to join us today. As Laura mentioned, I was very excited to be brought in to talk to stakeholders at Middlesex and create a paper that looked at the efforts that they've been working on in the EDI space. The paper can be viewed in the resources section of this wonderful platform, and we will surely send it around afterwards. I'm delighted to kind of walk through some of our core findings and explore some of the great initiatives at Middlesex today. And I'm on the call with Dr. Sandra, as Laura mentioned, who is a senior lecturer in chemistry and biochemistry at Middlesex, and also Dr. Deeba, Gallacher, who's our head of academic practice enhancement, also at Middlesex. So thank you both for joining today. I think what would be really nice to just scene set, first of all, is if I can ask you both to give a quick introduction and a little bit around the motivations and your background in the EDI space. Deeba, can I pass to you to start with?
Certainly, Rachel. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction, and welcome colleagues that are joining us today. So as Rachel explained, my name is Dr. Deeba Gallacher, and I'm Head of Academic Practice Enhancement at Middlesex University at our London campus. I think, we intentionally choose as where we work. And Middlesex for me is incredibly important in the work that we have consistently done for a number of years, championing widening participation. I started my career at Middlesex over 20 years ago, and in all honesty, I was disappointed to see in the sector the representation of both females and ethnic minorities in particular spaces. I would attend conferences, engage in networks, and it's of a core value of my own personally. So the work that I undertake aligns with the institution in which I belong. But for me, it's very much a personal motivation as well, to inspire others, to represent others, and to be a leader for voices in spaces where voices currently aren't. So I think there's very much personal motivations in how I've navigated my career, Rachel.
Thanks. And how about you, Sandra?
Hi, everyone. Sandra Appiah. I've been a lecturer at universities for about 16 years, teaching chemistry and related subjects. Now I specialize in biochemistry. And before I tell you a bit more about myself and what motivates me is just to mention that when we discriminate against people based on their protected characteristics, be it their gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, we are committing a crime. So it's against the law. However, it's very prevalent in the university sector, in our society at large, unfortunately. Okay, so what about myself in terms of how I got into the EDI area? I only became active in EDI work in not 19, so I'm not that old, in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement resurged, and I was at home, working from home, and I could really focus and listen what was happening. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first and my experiences, and then I will comment a bit more on my motivation. So when I finished my master's in analytical chemistry, I won a studentship to study for PhD. I collected my data. I worked in 3 different laboratories, 3 different institutions, and at no time did I feel that my difference made any difference. I did not experience any obvious bias or discrimination or anything like that at all. In fact, I had a wonderful time being creative and really focusing on my work. So I did not experience what some other people experience. It was only when I've been a lecturer for quite a few years that I noticed that I have artificially reached a glass ceiling. And then I became a lot more aware. I also became aware when I started my research group as a lecturer that some of my PhD students who are from African background in particular were discriminated against. But throughout that time, I just counseled students locally. I was never involved in university-wide or sector-wide events until 2020. Yeah, so my main drive is to make sure that particularly there's a representation for undergraduate students, that they can see themselves when they go to university, they can see that they can achieve. And also for PhD students to have the great experience I had, and not to be traumatized, because that's what some people say, that they feel traumatized by their PhD journey. Because if that happens, then we can have the academics, then we can have the representation. So I'm very much focused on increasing representation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for sharing such personal experiences with this journey. Thank you. I thought it would be useful before we dig into the wonderful projects that we look at in the paper and also that you'll be talking about today, just to look at the kind of demographics of Middlesex University, to kind of look at a little bit of scene setting. You can see from the screen there that there are some kind of highlight percentages and so on. And Deeba, I wondered if you could dig into that a little more.
Yes, certainly. I think it's really important to give a bit of context in terms of what we're talking about. So there are some high-level indicators there in terms of what our Middlesex community looks like. And I think I need to be clear from the outset that as a widening participation institution, the university and a post-1992 institution, one of our strategic commitments is to be inclusive of those who are underrepresented in higher education. So the university itself, we deliver approximately 255 undergraduate programs and 190 postgraduate programs. And these are our campuses in London, Dubai, and Mauritius. And furthermore, we work closely with around 66 UK and international partners to inform global practice. So we have a huge wealth of students, of which around 20,000 are at our UK London campus. And as you can see, over 150 nationalities as well. So very much a global institution, as we work in partnership with over 26 countries to provide a high quality education. So incredible richness and diversity that's reflected in our student demographics, but also an incredible richness and diversity that's reflected in our staff community as well, from across these different stakeholders of our partners and our global campuses.
Lovely, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the quote that we got from Anna Cipriano, who's the PVC for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Middlesex, who said, diversity's in our DNA. And I think that really captures everything you've said, Deeba. Mm-hmm. What I would like to do now, if it's okay with you both, is take a look in a little more detail about the great work that you've been doing separately and together to work on bolstering inclusivity at Middlesex. So Sandra, I'm going to pass over to you, if that's okay to start with.
Yes, it's good. I'm going to talk initially about what I've been doing at the course level, and then how I've extended that to university and sector-wide. I think throughout my teaching career, I have felt that just by teaching chemistry, biochemistry, I'm not teaching just science, I'm teaching a different language that students struggle to understand. So in the interest of inclusivity, to make sure that all students are catered for, I have worked very closely to our e-learning team at Middlesex University. I mean, that has been throughout my teaching career. The last few years, I have extended the collaboration with McGraw, and it's been transformational for our students. So typically, we will have embedded in the course adaptive learning, so the students feel comfortable making mistakes in their own homes or in the libraries, just privately, and learning through that kind of process. And I think that is a brilliant process because it's intentional to help students who may be weaker in biochemistry, but by applying it and making it available to all students, everyone benefits from it. And it depends on the engagement level. Also to remember that Middlesex University, a post-92 university in London, Barnet's got about 47% of the population from global majority background. We are even more diverse at Middlesex. About 62% of our students are the first in their family to go to university. So not only do we have the responsibility to teach them the core subjects that we are teaching, we've got the responsibility to help them navigate the university sector. So that all of that is really part of what I do. We have, I work very, very closely to colleagues in the Natural Science Department. In the paper that we are launching today, it's quoted Ivan Punev, Dr. Helen Roberts, Duncan Allardyce, and not quoted in the paper is Dr. Dirk Wildbauer. We work and we think about how to make our programs really inclusive, so build a culture in there. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not just my initiative, it's something that is quite collaborative and has been pre-2020. When I became aware of how serious the issue of representation is at Middlesex, then I started including more stakeholders in what I do. And the first stakeholder to include are, of course, students. Students don't want us to make or produce solutions for them. They want to be part of the solution. So I form an academia initiative with students, with academics within Middlesex University, both and professional services staff. But it also became very clear that for representation, especially representation in textbooks, we needed more stakeholders. So I reached out to McGraw Hill and very pleased that due to the alignment of our values, they agreed to work with us. Laura has already mentioned the initiatives we have done, so I can elaborate a little bit later, but not right now. So we formed the Successes in the Academia initiative, which extended to the Black Chemists network. And I think that is really just part of being an academic and wanting to help all students, regardless of ethnicity or background.
I love that. Thanks for sharing, Sandra.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of the work that you've been doing with your colleagues in the Natural Sciences Department in a bit. But Deeba, how about you? What have you been doing? I know you work with a lot of people at Middlesex.
Thanks, Rachel. And yes, I think Sandra has beautifully highlighted some of the distinct work in her department and Faculty of Science and Technology. I have the huge benefit of working across the institution and with our global campuses to ensure that the expertise that we have internally is harnessed, and the good practice that Sandra has mentioned that's happening within her particular discipline area is replicated, so that as a true learning organisation, we can learn from one another. We can take an evidence-informed approach in order to work for our students and our community and really push forward. At Middlesex, we take a really proactive approach to our vision for inclusion, equity, equality, and diversity. So the work that we do is wonderful because it's never ending. We're in a context where things are constantly changing, whether that be language, data, white papers, government steer. So we really are in a fluid environment. So because of that, work will never be finished. But what's important is that we can see and have impact for our community, not only in terms of Middlesex, but local, global communities as well. So the work that I'll be talking about in terms of creating an inclusive curricula is really situated at an institutional level in order to harness practice and provide structure and processes to enhanced approaches within the curriculum. So is it possible just to move the slide forward and we can look at the inclusive curricular framework that's been developed at Middlesex? So just to explain how this was developed, firstly, a substantial amount of work has come together internally at Middlesex, harnessing expertise, as I say, from colleagues from our global campuses, our student community, Students' Union, and our academic and professional service community to take a really holistic approach to EDI at Middlesex. Approximately around 120 colleagues and students came together to really consider our aspirations for the university and how we could provide structure in our approach. And this is the framework that was developed by these colleagues over a period of about 2 years. And as I'm sure all of you will be aware in working in this space, there are no quick fixes as such. Care, discussion and time was taken in order to produce something that we felt resonated with us as a community and would push us forward. So I will just explain some of the components of the framework. You can see in the middle, in terms of co-creating an evolving decolonized curriculum, this is our purpose statement. This was created by a writing group of the 120 colleagues and students to convey what the inclusive curriculum framework is aiming to achieve. Around this purpose statement, there are 6 curriculum categories and the subcategories as well, illustrating the scope of the inclusive curricula framework. The real tenets of the framework encircle the curriculum categories, highlighting its core manifesto for enhancement. So as you can see, it's very much holistic, thinking of all of the different aspects that impact on students' life. Enveloping the edge of the framework are our inclusion working principles. And of course, to support colleagues, we have a series of guidance documents that help unpack these. But really, our working principles show that these are relevant to all aspects of the framework and they are interconnected. To the side of the framework, you can see the aspiration for the framework, and this is very much aligned to our vision institutionally, our Middlesex 2031 Knowledge into Action strategy. So the title of the framework also sits to the side to give context that if the visual is used in isolation, it can come together to see how it holistically can be used. So from having this framework, how do we use it? How does it impact in our working lives? Really, this framework helps us to work towards inclusion, diversity and equity within our curriculum. So our program design, considering, if I pick any of these, considering our technologies that we use, how accessible they are, considering our learning resources that we have in terms of reading lists, considering the support that we offer for students and how culturally that may be significant if we're talking about mental health and well-being, and cultural nuances that are going to support different types of students to access and engage with the support we have. How do we embed these elements in? So you can see that this is really a collaboration of professional services and academics coming together to ensure that pedagogically there's a sound learning and teaching approaches of ways of supporting students. From the different curricular components, there's a series of reflective questions that colleagues can ask about their practice for themselves as individuals, but also to use as program teams. So there might be elements around assessment and feedback, a series of reflective questions that can be asked and answered in opportunities of validation and review, appraisals, teaching observations, a number of different mechanisms, induction to the university as well, and also in our enhanced monitoring activity that we undertake for programs to provide specific support. But I think probably one of the most important things to outline is that this provides the underlying structure and framework to all that we do. And that is core. That is core for our approach. It really is as a pillar. So anything that we're considering in the university, it has core principles of EDI. How is EDI embedded into the very thinking of how we go about doing something. And I think actually in terms of how we came to develop this, EDI was core to our thinking about the structure of the people and the communities that need to be involved in creating this. So I think it really was a huge achievement in role modelling approaches, as well as developing a product at the end.
Thanks so much, Deeba. It's incredible to see such an immense piece of work undertaken by such an incredible volume of stakeholders at Middlesex. So a big congratulations to you and the team for putting this together. Visually, it's stunning, very engaging. And I know that you both have worked incredibly hard to kind of amplify this through various channels at Middlesex. That was something I wanted to dig into, if that's okay with you both, because when we spoke, you kind of looked at the different forums that you might disseminate this kind of information. And that was something that always kind of was a takeaway from me, how you would get this into the hearts and souls and the minds of all of your colleagues at Middlesex. Would either of you like to, expand on that at all?
Yes, certainly, Rachel.
I'll let Deeba go.
Thanks, Sandra. I think one of the real positives of the work is that colleagues want to be involved in working in EDI. Not only do they want to be involved, they want to support students. They want their approach to be inclusive. And we really take inclusive to be in a really wide field. So we've mentioned earlier issues around accessibility. We've obviously talked about issues of culture, ethnicity, race, but we've also approached the framework with the eyes of gender and sexual orientation as well, and mental health and disability. So our approach to inclusion is wide, and as I've mentioned, it's fluid as well. There will be more areas, I'm sure, to come, but actually the principles that have been developed can be applicable to all. And then we sort of harness project work to promote specific activities where needed, with the nuanced elements of disciplines in terms of the makeup of their area. But I think the beauty of this is that colleagues want to be involved. So we get to talk about it at a number of different forums and networks, and that's internally and externally. So we do work with Advance HE as well as one of our bodies. We get to talk about the approach at Middlesex with the community as well, the local community of Barnet, about how we make our students feel more included in the community of Middlesex. And of course, with different stakeholders within the institution. Like all large organisations, there are bodies of people in different roles. And I think what's important is how you take a framework like this and apply it to your own role. What does this inclusive curriculum mean for me as a programme leader, a module leader, a head of department, a head of wellbeing services? It's how can I apply this to me, and how can I help support my colleagues and my students taking it forward? So although this visual of a framework has been presented right now, you can imagine the wealth of materials that sit underneath it in helping people to apply this framework to the role that they have.
I love that. Thank you so much. I was especially impressed, Sandra.
Yeah, I said our comments on that. Thank you, Deeba. The work Deeba has done in motivating all of us to get involved is incredible. She started way before any like for myself. I speak for myself. She collaborated with the student union. I don't know whether it was 2019 or 18, Deeba.
This particular work was actually, the work that we're discussing now was established in 2019. But I have to say, historically, you know, there has been work ongoing since I started my career at Middlesex in 2002. So I really do mean that we have championed inclusivity and equity and diversity for a number of years. It is part of our DNA, as our PVC said, and the work will never end. But because of contextual changes, it does need to realign with current context. And I think that that's what this body of work does for now.
Yeah. And just to comment that I'm heavily into EDI, but I find it a challenge to diversify the curriculum, for example, for biochemistry and chemistry, because we've got the giants, we've got people who have research, groundbreaking work, and I would never want to deprive my students of that material. But then we have to be intentional in including other voices as well. So this is one of the main motivation I had working with McGraw Hill, and just talking to them just to see that we can actually include case studies, we can include other material to support this, which is really good. I think Laura mentioned earlier on that there are less than 1% professors. I think she meant specifically less than 1% professors in chemistry. And therefore, if we are going to diversify that, the resources for that area, we've got a big task on our hands. So yeah, so this is an ongoing work. As excited as I am about the inclusive learning framework and everything else, the implementation for some subject areas is quite a challenge. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Sandra. And can I also state here, working in this area for a number of years and undertaking the in-depth work that I take, it's a hugely emotive area as well. You know, people are often involved significantly because of their own lived experiences, their own experiences within society or within academia. And because of that, it is a hugely emotive and challenging piece of work. I would say that people want to be inclusive and they want support in how to be inclusive and to learn from one another's. There's also a cautionary aspect to this, particularly in language, I think, and the language that we use and how it moves forward at quite a pace. And if you aren't particularly in-depth in that particular area, you may wonder, am I using the correct language? Actually, is this the right approach I'm taking? So there is a certain fear factor that I have experienced with colleagues of wanting to do the right thing, but understanding, am I doing the right thing? Or actually, is this bad practice that was once considered, okay or good practice? And I think there is that as an understanding of the changing nature of the context in which we're living in. It's the movement of travel and the intentions also behind what we are employing.
Yeah,
I love that. Thanks, Sandra. Are you just about to jump in? No. I was just going to jump in on the intentional piece, because the title of the paper is Intentionality for Inclusivity, and there's a big focus throughout on this concept that Anna, the PVC for EDI at Middlesex, initially introduced me to, which is without intentionality, we're just not going to see the action that we want. And so there's a great deal of, I think, and what my takeaway was, great deal of intent and purpose, drive and thought in everything you do, from the onboarding of your students, through to the discussions you're having with them and staff as well. But there's just such great intent there that I just wanted to dig into what, that both means to, what that means to both of you. Sorry.
Thanks, Rachel. And I think that is summed up beautifully. It's the action with intent. It's really stripping away to our very core values of what we intend on doing as an institution, and the type of institution we are, and the types of students that we encourage in. I think the white paper nicely explains our sort of historic intent as an institution and how we are founded. And we see the diversity that we have of Middlesex as one of our core strengths. But actually, how do we capitalise and utilise that? And even in mentioning our PVC for EDI, Anna Kyprianou, that is part of our intent, the structure that we have within the institution to ensure that elements have spaces in which to go. So it isn't about colleagues having excellent practice and making really good headways in small pockets across the University of Programmes. That is brilliant, but it's with intention that we can pull together and actually understand for parity of students and the experiences that they have, how we learn from one another and have solid foundations. And the inclusive curriculum is just one way of addressing that in our structures from a pedagogic learning design perspective.
Excellent. Well, we've quoted our PVC. I will quote my colleague, Duncan Allardyce, Scottish white male I work very closely with. And in the white paper, he's put, we are talking and we are thinking about it more. We are looking to make sure the course works for all learners. And just by knowing that different learners, different people from different backgrounds have different experiences, and actively thinking about it and intentionally making provision to inspire and motivate all of them is really good. With our student population, it means that we have a lot of strong students graduating. A lot of times we focus on the attainment gap and we forget about the Black and brown students who are achieving quite well and moving on to do great things. And yes, so we intentionally invite them back. I don't just invite students who have got first and 2-1, even though there are quite a lot of them. I throw open invitation to all students to come back and see how what they've learned on the courses, on the programs, on individual modules have helped them in the world of work, or whether they've gone on to further studies. Just by having so many Black and brown people, of course, we get a lot of them back talking to our students, which is very inspiring. So when we talk about representation, it's the intent to invite these students to come back and inspire. I also invite businesses, people who've done really well in recruiting our students to come and say what they are looking for. That is also intentional to make students know that this is what employers are looking for. So yes, there are quite a lot of areas that we are working with the intent. But I have to always emphasize that it needs to be inclusive, where the working team are from a wide range of abilities, demographics, and expertise.
Thanks, Sandra. And if I could just add to that, I think, Rachel, it's there are a number of different metrics and measures, and I think there are a number of different slices and we are really doing a sort of whistle-stop tour through some of our activities. But like any large organisations, there's a number of different ways to help move and shift the dial towards a better, more inclusive space. So for some, we're talking about structures that are present. We're also talking about role modelling and visibility as well, of not only people that students might see within their programme team, but it's also visibility and role modelling of colleagues at different levels and grades, professors, what your senior management structure looks like, how that's represented sort of in the UK. And there's been, plenty of work done in the sector around that. And I think, in terms of measures and metrics and institutional commitments, there is undoubtedly issues around awarding gaps or attainment gaps, in terms of language of how this is situated as well. It does change, but, that there are differences. And why are there differences? And plenty of work has been undertaken in order to help understand, in order for institutions to see how can their students' experience be valued and actually be authentically valued. I think that's probably a really important point. It's the authenticity around action as well as intentionality. So that we move beyond it looks like this, but don't worry, we've got representation here, but actually authentically valuing their experiences within our learning outcomes, within our assessment and feedback mechanisms, within our programme team, within the support that we have as scaffolded around. So there's a number of different slices, but actually it's how we work together to help shift that dial, and the measures that we use, which are also multiple and can be quite difficult to look at. There are some very clear measures. If we look at graduate outcomes, if we look at progression or non-continuation, withdrawal, etc. But there are also some less clear measures, and I think it's the ongoing work that you do within your community and your context to help build pictures of factors that are important to your community.
I love that. Thank you so much, Deeba, for sharing that. And it brings me on nicely, if you don't mind, to this kind of idea of how you measure the efforts of these, initiatives in this space. And obviously, you've talked to a number of the metrics that you might dig into. I was very fortunate because as part of this paper, Sandra introduced me to Anastasia, and I'm going to mispronounce her name, Kalin. Is it Kalin? She used to be the vice president of the Science and Technology faculty. So Sandra kindly introduced me to her to kind of hear from a student about how she was finding all of the work done at Middlesex. And I found the comments that she had moving because, she sat with Sandra and I, and she shared, how the onboarding process had meant the absolute world to her, how she felt welcomed from day one because there had been such intent and such purpose with the people that had been brought in to meet her. But I think she also talked an amazing story around the representation in her course and how, because, there's been so much work being done at curriculum level to focus on diversifying reading lists, she felt that she had people to look up to. And that's the final quote of the paper is, when it comes to role models, she said, I've found them here at Middlesex. And I just thought, you can't ask for more of a ringing endorsement of this wonderful framework and the wonderful work you guys are doing than that quote. Obviously, metrics are a very quantitative way of looking at it, but that quote I just thought was just phenomenal for, a green light, a tick box, whatever way you want to look at it. It's just, a real ringing endorsement of the great work that you guys have done. So just wanted to highlight that and see if there's anything else you'd like to share about Anastasia or perhaps just the student voice, which is so important.
I think with the student voice, I find that what they most appreciate is their involvement. I think that is just being part of a community of inquiry into how we can change things, how we can make things different, better, and not just being part of it, but co-leading these initiatives. I think that is really, really helpful. For the larger group of students who cannot feasibly be part of these initiatives, just I've got some codes here in terms of the learning, adaptive learning, McGraw-Hill, that is a very useful tool. It's made it easy to remember information and learn things. And so on every level, we have this continuous feedback where we get feedback on the tools we are providing and how asking whether it's useful or not. And over 90% who say it is. The 10% that might not think so may not have used it, because typically over 90% do well. So yeah, I think in terms of student feedback, just thank you for making visible opportunities for internships. So we apply for Royal Society chemistry internships. We help students get other internships elsewhere to create their network, and we get continuous feedback in that sense. Quantitatively, it's usually measured at the end of the modules to check how students are finding the things we are providing for them.
I think I'd like to add to that,
Deeba.
There are some great examples there that Sandra has given us. And I think in terms of developing the foundations in the inclusive curricular framework, there were student insight groups, under a number of different themes that students could come together as students group and feed back into the work, but also sit on various panels as equals, as contributors, as co-leading what the production of this work and what they felt they needed, which is really important to have the student voice and leadership there. But I would say that is one aspect. We look at EDI from really as a core of everything we do. So in terms of our student representation, our program leads, for example, in terms of our student population, what do they look like? Are they representative for the student body? But it's also having these voices that are clearly active and engaged, and students that want to come in and provide their, contribute in a collaborative way. But also equally as important is those students that hide away, that you don't hear from, and how do you help engage the community here? And we actively undertake a plethora of work to help understand better their voice and have authentic conversations in order to pull different voices in, because I think it's wonderful to see the impact that we have and are making for students overall. But it's also really, really important to help to try and pull in voices that don't necessarily come forward so easily.
Yeah, I know time is short, but I'll just say two words: academic advising. So we work a lot through that, but I don't think we will elaborate now because of the time.
Yeah, I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone past. It's been so great to speak to you both. I'm mindful that we wanted to do a tiny bit of Q&A, and I believe Laura Pacey is going to join us again for that. So we see a couple of questions popping in, but Laura's here to guide us onwards. So thanks again to Deeba and Sandra.
Yes, thank you. The discussion has flown by, and I knew we'd be tight for time. Thinking about your discussion, I think the need for transparency and collaboration, that understanding that it's ongoing work has really been coming through. So I hope that's a fair representation. But looking at a few of the themes that are cropping up in the question, and if we only have time for one, then I hope people don't mind me rolling them up. But essentially, if you were early in your EDI journey as an institution, where do you start? What are your tips for building a best practice community? And what is the kind of go-to guidance that exists for ethical components and everything else that really you've been talking about? Where's the starting point?
Wonderful. I think I'll sort of briefly answer some of that, but I'm pretty sure we could have a session of an hour just on that alone. But as a starting point, I think understanding your context as an institution is really, really important. Understanding your context and understanding your community. So in terms of the data you have, what does that look like? Where are your sticking points? Where does work need to be done? Because I think there's specific work and then there's overarching work. And there is plenty of guidance through elements such as Advanced HE around topic areas, themes, and institutions are doing this, of course, themselves as well, about how to guide you and where to start. But I think thinking about it holistically is really, really important, and thinking about the structures that you have in place or the structures that require building. A lot of this is about community building as well, harnessing the expertise that you have and utilizing them within your institution for benefit of your students. So strong structural support is important, and understanding your context. But I would suggest that there is plenty of information and guidance that's out there in terms of steps to take.
Wonderful. Sandra, do you have anything to add?
Now I'm curious to have another question.
Okay, one more.
Is there something else?
So you mentioned the fluidity that's necessary to take an approach. Someone's asked if you could just boil it down to one core principle which needs to, and you'll imagine, will need to underpin EDI programs in 50 years' time. What is that core principle?
I defer to Deeba again.
Well, I think the importance is engagement. It requires consistent engagement as opposed to the kind of dipping in and out. The ethos has to be something that is part of the foundations as opposed to add-on. We're doing some work on EDI and it's added on. If it's an add-on, it will fall off. It needs to be a core principle.
Absolutely. And with that, because I feel like any of the other questions could open into a much longer discussion, I suggest that we wrap up there. But thank you so much for your insights. I think what's fantastic about the white paper and the work that we've done so far is that your practical recommendations really do come through, and that is what's needed for this ongoing work, as you mentioned, and that consistent engagement. Coming up next, we have a session in half an hour on using data analytics to inform teaching and learning, working smarter, not harder. And Rachel, you're in that session again, so it will be used to your lovely face. But until then, thank you to Rachel, of course, but massive thanks to Dr. Sandra Appiah and Dr. Deeba Gallacher. It's been wonderful having you on board for this session, and of course, for all of your insights in the white paper.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.